The word outlier, noun, means 1. Something that is situated away from or classed differently from a main or related body. 2. A statistical observation that is markedly different in value from the others of the sample. We begin. Roseto, a small Pennsylvania town founded by immigrants from the Italian village of Roseto Valfortore, became a medical mystery in the 1950s when researchers discovered extremely low rates of heart disease and longer lifespans compared to the rest of the U.S. This was surprising because the residents had unhealthy diets, smoked heavily, and were often overweight, so diet, exercise, genetics, and location couldn't explain their good health. Doctors Stuart Wolfe and sociologist John Brune found the real reason was Roseto's unique social structure: strong family bonds, close community ties, shared culture, respect for elders, religious unity, equality, and constant social interaction. These social and cultural factors protected residents from stress and contributed to their exceptional health. Roseto became an outlier, showing that community and culture can have a powerful impact on well-being, a lesson used to introduce the broader idea that success and health are shaped by environment, not just individual choices. Chapter 1. The Matthew Effect. For unto everyone that hath shall be given, and he shall have abundance, but from him that hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath. Matthew 25:29. The chapter begins with the 2007 Memorial Cup hockey final to illustrate a hidden bias in elite sports. A disproportionate number of top players are born early in the year. Psychologist Roger Barnsley discovered that because Canadian youth hockey uses a January 1st age cutoff, children born in January to March are older, bigger, and physically more mature than peers in the same age group. Coaches mistake maturity for talent, select those older kids for elite teams, and give them better coaching and more practice. This early advantage compounds over time, creating the Matthew effect, a cumulative advantage where those who start slightly ahead get more opportunities and pull further ahead. The same pattern appears in baseball, European soccer, and even education. Older students within a grade are more likely to be placed in advanced streams, perform better long-term, and are overrepresented in college, while younger peers are unfairly disadvantaged. The chapter argues that success isn't purely merit-based, but heavily shaped by arbitrary systems like cutoff dates that create structural advantages. Many talented people are overlooked simply because they were born later in the selection year. Once someone is seen as ahead, the world keeps pushing them forward. Once someone is seen as behind, the world quietly pulls resources away. Main takeaway. The Matthew effect shows that inequity often starts from tiny, unfair differences and grows because systems keep rewarding the people who already got a head start. Chapter 2. The chapter argues that extraordinary success comes not just from talent, but from massive amounts of practice made possible by rare opportunities. Using Bill Joy as the main example, it shows how his access to the University of Michigan's early time-sharing computer system in the 1970s allowed him to accumulate around 10,000 hours of programming, the level researchers say is required for world-class expertise. Psychologist Kay Anders Ericsson's studies of musicians and other experts support the 10,000-hour rule, showing that top performers are distinguished mainly by how much deliberate practice they put in, not by innate genius. The same pattern appears with the Beatles, who gained thousands of performance hours playing non-stop in Hamburg, and Bill Gates, who had extraordinary early access to computers through his elite school and lucky connections, letting him practice constantly as a teenager. In each case, success came from talent plus unusual opportunities that allowed intense practice. The chapter then expands the idea to timing and birth years. Just as many American industrial billionaires were born in the perfect window to benefit from the 1860s-70s economic boom, many tech pioneers, Gates, Jobs, Ballmer, Schmidt, Joy, and others, were born in the mid-1950s, the ideal age to take advantage of the personal computer revolution beginning in 1975. The core message: Success is built where talent meets opportunity, timing, and thousands of hours of practice. Great achievers aren't just gifted, they are also lucky to be in the right place at the right time with the chance to work far harder than everyone else. Chapter 3: The Troubled Geniuses, with Part 1. The chapter introduces Christopher Langan, a man with an extraordinarily high IQ, around 195, who performs brilliantly on an American quiz show and is widely seen as a pure genius. His early life shows astonishing intellectual ability. Teaching himself to read as a toddler, mastering advanced math and philosophy as a teenager, acing tests effortlessly, and demonstrating exceptional talents across subjects. The story then shifts to psychologist Lewis Terman, who in the 1920s conducted a massive study to identify the most gifted children in California using IQ testing. He selected 1,470 children with extremely high IQs, the termites, and predicted they would grow into world-changing leaders. But Terman was wrong. Most of the termites grew up to have respectable but ordinary careers. None became major historical figures, and none won Nobel Prizes. Ironically, 2 actual future Nobel laureates were tested and rejected from Terman's study because their IQs weren't high enough. Later analysis showed that a random group of kids from similar backgrounds would have achieved almost as much as Terman's carefully chosen geniuses. The deeper lesson is that IQ only matters up to a threshold, around 120. Beyond that, extra intelligence doesn't strongly predict real-world success. What matters more are other qualities: creativity, imagination, social skills, opportunity, personality, and environment. High IQ alone does not create outliers. Terman's mistake, and society's mistake, is believing genius automatically leads to greatness. It doesn't.
Chapter 4: Genius Without Support. Chris Langan grew up in extreme poverty under an abusive stepfather, surrounded by instability and without adult guidance. Despite being a rare intellectual prodigy, his childhood never equipped him with the social knowledge or practical skills needed to navigate institutions like schools, employers, or bureaucracies. At Reed College, Langan lost his scholarship because his mother failed to submit required financial aid paperwork. The college offered no flexibility or support. Later at Montana State University, a broken-down car caused him to miss classes, and administrators again refused minor accommodations. Frustrated and unsupported, Langan dropped out for good. Without a degree, he spent decades working low-level jobs while privately developing complex theories about reality and cognition. Yet he has struggled to publish or gain recognition, largely because he lacks academic credentials and institutional backing. The chapter contrasts Langan's trajectory with that of Robert Oppenheimer, another intellectual prodigy, one born into wealth, education, and cultural confidence. Oppenheimer was raised with mentorship and what sociologists call concerted cultivation, parents who taught him how to speak to authority, ask for help, and advocate for himself. These skills allowed him to recover from serious mistakes and eventually earn the trust of powerful institutions, culminating in his leadership of the Manhattan Project. Evidence from Lewis Terman's long-term study of gifted children reinforces this pattern. The most successful geniuses were not necessarily the smartest, but those raised in middle and upper-class families that taught social confidence and practical intelligence. Equally brilliant children from poor backgrounds overwhelmingly failed to thrive, not because of lower ability, but because of weaker environments. The central lesson? Genius alone is not enough. Without support, mentorship, and cultural tools for navigating the world, even extraordinary talent can be wasted. No one, not even the smartest, succeeds alone. Chapter 5: The Hidden Advantages of Joe Flom. At first glance, Joe Flom appears to embody the classic rags-to-riches story, the son of poor Jewish garment workers from Brooklyn who overcame discrimination to build one of the most powerful law firms in the world. But this chapter argues that his success was not driven by brilliance alone. It was shaped by hidden advantages rooted in history, culture, and timing. Lesson 1: The importance of being Jewish in that era. In the 1940s and 1950s, elite white-shoe Wall Street law firms openly excluded Jewish lawyers. Shut out from prestigious corporate work, talented Jewish graduates like Flom were pushed into small second-tier firms handling undesirable legal work, particularly litigation and hostile takeover proxy fights. At the time, this work was considered low status and unglamorous, but Flom spent decades mastering it. When hostile takeovers surged in the 1970s, he was one of the few true experts in the field. Skadden rose to dominance precisely because Flom had been forced, by discrimination, into the one area of law that later became immensely valuable. What looked like a disadvantage became a long-term professional edge. Lesson 2. Demographic luck. The chapter compares Maurice Janklov, born in 1902, with his son Mort, born in the early 1930s. Maurice entered the legal profession during the Great Depression, when solo Jewish lawyers were financially devastated and opportunities were scarce. Mort, by contrast, was born into a small demographic trough generation, which gave him significant advantages: smaller school classes, better access to teachers, easier entry into top colleges, and plentiful high-paying jobs while studying. Coming of age in the post-war economic expansion made success far more attainable. Joe Flom benefited from the same timing. He entered adulthood just before takeover law became lucrative. Lesson 3. Garment industry roots. The chapter introduces Louis and Regina Borgenich, Jewish immigrants whose lives illuminate the garment industry culture Flom's parents came from. Jewish immigrants entered garment work because other professions were closed to them. That industry demanded independence, hustle, negotiation, risk-taking, and constant problem-solving. Children raised in this environment absorbed those traits unconsciously. Long before entering professions like law or business, they were trained in persuasion, autonomy, and comfort with competition. Flom's upbringing quietly prepared him for aggressive deal-making and high-stakes legal battles. The bigger picture. Joe Flom did not succeed because he was a poor Jewish kid from Brooklyn. He succeeded partly because of it. His background pushed him into overlooked areas of law, gave him perfect generational timing, and shaped him through a culture that rewarded resilience and self-reliance. Success, the chapter argues, does not come from talent or effort alone. It emerges from the interaction of 1. Cultural inheritance, skills and attitudes passed down through families; 2. Timing, being born at the right historical moment; and 3. Opportunity structures, industries that reward autonomy, learning, and risk-taking. Jewish immigrants in New York were not random success stories. They arrived with garment skills just as the industry was booming. The work allowed them to become independent quickly, and their children grew up watching adults negotiate, persuade, organize, and take risks. When those children later entered elite professions, they carried a massive invisible advantage. The usual narrative is flipped. Jewish lawyers did not rise despite poverty. They rose because their parents' work trained them in the mindset elite professions reward. They learned assertiveness, comfort with power, persuasion, independence, and a belief that effort can change outcomes. That is the hidden legacy.
Chapter 6. This chapter shows that human behavior does not develop in isolation. What happened in Harlan, Kentucky, decades of violent family feuds, was not simply the result of a few hot-tempered individuals making bad choices. When similar violence appeared again and again across many Appalachian towns, it revealed something larger at work, a shared cultural mindset passed down over generations. The people who settled Appalachia came from harsh, lawless regions of the British Isles, where survival depended on toughness, family loyalty, and defending one's reputation at all costs. In those environments, showing weakness invited theft, humiliation, or destruction. As a result, violence became a socially acceptable way to protect honor. Even small insults demanded a response. Over time, this way of thinking became normal, expected even, respected. What makes this especially powerful is that the culture survived long after the original conditions disappeared. People no longer lived as herdsmen in lawless borderlands, yet the emotional reflexes remained. The chapter's modern experiments show that descendants of these cultures still respond more aggressively to insults, even in safe, modern settings. This proves that culture can outlive the environment that created it. The deeper lesson is that we often mistake cultural behavior for personal character. We assume people act violently, defensively, or emotionally because of individual flaws, when in reality they may be following invisible cultural scripts they inherited without choosing. These scripts influence what people consider normal, manly, disrespectful, or unacceptable. Ultimately, the chapter teaches that if we want to understand behavior, whether conflict, success, failure, or emotional reactions, we must look beyond the individual and into history. Cultural legacies shape how people think, feel, and react, often without their awareness. Recognizing this doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it helps explain it and gives us the insight needed to change it. Chapter 7. This chapter explains that plane crashes usually aren't caused by mechanical failure, but by human communication and cultural factors, especially how pilots talk to each other in the cockpit. Malcolm Gladwell begins with the 1997 Korean airline Flight 801 crash in Guam, where a perfectly functional plane crashed into a hill, killing 228 people. The pilots were experienced, the plane worked fine, and the weather was bad but manageable. The problem was miscommunication. The first officer and flight engineer noticed danger but did not speak up forcefully enough, and the captain reacted too slowly. Gladwell then shows that this wasn't an isolated incident. Korean Air had an unusually high crash rate for many years. Investigations revealed poor cockpit communication, low morale, weak training, and a culture where junior crew members were reluctant to challenge captains. To explain this pattern, Gladwell introduces the idea of mitigated speech, language that softens or downplays urgency. In aviation, this can be deadly. For example, instead of clearly saying, "We are in an emergency and must land now," pilots might say, "We're running out of fuel," which air traffic control may not treat as urgent. He illustrates this with another crash, Avianca Flight 052, 1990, near New York. The plane ran out of fuel after long delays. The co-pilots knew they were in danger but never clearly declared an emergency. Their polite, indirect communication led to fatal misunderstandings. Gladwell connects this to cultural psychology, especially research by Geert Hofstede on power distance, how much a culture respects hierarchy and authority. In high-power distance cultures, like Colombia and South Korea at the time, subordinates are less likely to challenge leaders. In low-power distance cultures, like the US or Scandinavia, speaking up is more acceptable. In aviation, high-power distance can be dangerous because safety depends on teamwork and clear communication, not hierarchy. Modern airlines now use crew resource management training to reduce power distance, encourage direct speech, and empower co-pilots to challenge captains. Korean Air dramatically improved its safety record only after recognizing and changing its cultural communication norms, proving that culture can strongly influence success or failure. Gladwell ends the chapter by arguing that success and failure cannot be understood by looking only at individual skill. Who we are is shaped by where we come from, and ignoring cultural influences, especially in high-risk professions, can have deadly consequences. Chapter 8. In this chapter, Malcolm Gladwell argues that Asian success in mathematics is not due to innate intelligence, but cultural legacies, especially those shaped by wet rice farming and language structure. Gladwell begins by describing traditional rice cultivation in southern China, showing how it required intense, precise, year-round labor. Rice paddies are small, carefully engineered fields that demand constant attention, managing water levels, fertilizing correctly, transplanting seedlings, and weeding by hand. Unlike Western farming, which relies on machinery and seasonal work, rice farming is labor-intensive, skill-based, and continuous, often requiring up to 3,000 hours of work per year. This type of farming created a culture that strongly valued hard work, persistence, discipline, and effort. Rice farmers believed there was a direct link between effort and reward. The more carefully and diligently you worked, the better the harvest. This belief is reflected in Chinese proverbs such as, "No one who can rise before dawn 360 days a year fails to make his family rich."
Gladwell then connects this cultural attitude to education, especially mathematics.
He explains that Asian number systems are more logical and efficient than English. In languages like Chinese, numbers are shorter to pronounce and more regular, for example, 10-1 instead of 11, which allows children to remember more digits, learn counting faster, and perform mental math more easily. As a result, Asian children gain an early advantage in math, which builds confidence and enjoyment. However, Gladwell stresses that this advantage alone does not explain Asian dominance in math. The key factor is persistence. He illustrates this through the story of Renee, a woman struggling to understand the concept of slope in algebra. Renee is not naturally gifted at math, but she spends over 20 minutes experimenting, questioning, and refusing to give up until the concept finally makes sense. Her success comes from attitude and effort, not talent. Gladwell supports this idea with international test data, TIMMS. He notes that countries whose students answered the most questions on a long, boring questionnaire were the same countries that scored highest in math. This shows that willingness to concentrate and work hard predicts math success better than intelligence. The top-performing countries, Japan, South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, and Hong Kong, all share a cultural history shaped by rice farming, where perseverance and effort were essential for survival. Gladwell concludes that mathematical ability is largely cultural, not genetic. Societies shaped by rice agriculture developed habits of discipline, patience, and persistence, which translate perfectly into success in modern academic tasks like mathematics. Chapter 9. In Merita's Bargain, Malcolm Gladwell argues that success comes from opportunity, effort, and time spent learning, not from intelligence alone. He uses the KIPP Academy in the South Bronx and the story of a student named Merita to show how changing learning conditions can dramatically change outcomes for disadvantaged children. Gladwell begins by describing KIPP, Knowledge is Power program, a public middle school in one of the poorest areas of New York City. The school accepts students by lottery with no entrance exams, and most students come from low-income, single-parent households. Despite this, KIPP students perform far better in math than students in surrounding schools. By 8th grade, 84% are at or above grade level in math, matching students from wealthy suburbs. KIPP's success is not due to smarter students or better resources, but to more learning time. Students attend school longer days, Saturdays, and extra weeks in the summer. Gladwell connects this to research by sociologist Carl Alexander, which shows that poor and wealthy students learn at similar rates during the school year. The real achievement gap appears during summer vacation, when wealthy children continue learning through books, camps, and enrichment, while poor children fall behind. Gladwell explains that long summer vacations are a cultural legacy from early American farming traditions, which valued rest to avoid exhaustion. This contrasts with Asian cultures shaped by rice farming, where success depended on constant effort. As a result, Asian students have longer school years and higher academic achievement, especially in math. KIPP applies this rice paddy mindset to American education by reducing downtime and emphasizing hard work, persistence, and discipline. Teachers use the extra time to slow lessons down, let students struggle productively, and clearly show the link between effort and reward. The chapter's emotional core is the story of Merita, a 12-year-old KIPP student. Her day starts before 6 a.m., ends after 11 p.m., and includes hours of homework. She has little free time and gradually loses touch with friends outside KIPP. Gladwell describes this as Merita's bargain. She gives up her evenings, weekends, and much of her childhood in exchange for a real chance to escape poverty and attend college. Gladwell acknowledges that this is a heavy burden for a child, but argues that without opportunities like KIPP, hardworking students like Merita would never be able to compete with wealthier peers. The chapter concludes by reinforcing one of the book's central ideas. Outliers succeed because they are given chances, not because they are naturally gifted. To create a fairer society, Gladwell argues we must expand opportunities so success is not determined by luck, background, or wealth. Epilogue summary. In the epilogue of Outliers, Malcolm Gladwell uses his own family history to reinforce the book's central argument. Success is shaped by opportunity, culture, timing, and legacy, not individual talent alone. Gladwell begins by telling the seemingly inspirational story of his mother, Joyce Gladwell, who grew up poor in rural Jamaica and eventually became a successful writer and therapist in Canada. However, he then reveals that this version of the story is incomplete and misleading because it ignores the hidden advantages that made her success possible. One major factor was timing and historical opportunity. After riots in the Caribbean in the late 1930s, the British government introduced scholarships that allowed talented Jamaican children from poor backgrounds to attend elite secondary schools. Joyce and her twin sister benefited from these reforms. Had they been born just a few years earlier, these opportunities would not have existed. Another crucial influence was family determination, especially Gladwell's grandmother, Daisy Nation. Daisy believed fiercely in education and pushed her daughters to study, arranged tutoring, and made enormous financial sacrifices, including borrowing money from a local Chinese shopkeeper to send Joyce to university in England. Joyce's success, Gladwell shows, depended heavily on her mother's actions and support. Gladwell then traces this drive for education even further back into Jamaica's colonial racial hierarchy. His ancestors belonged to the colored class, descendants of white slave owners and enslaved African women. In Jamaica, unlike the United States, mixed-race individuals were often freed, educated, and given civil rights early on. Over generations, this gave them access to skilled jobs, education, and social status, creating a long-term advantage passed down through families. However, Gladwell does not romanticize this history. He openly acknowledges that these advantages came from slavery, racism, and color prejudice. He describes how lighter skin was prized, even within families, and how this caused lasting emotional harm. His mother later confronted these contradictions in her writing, recognizing that her family both benefited and suffered under racial hierarchies. Gladwell concludes that outliers are not self-made heroes. Their success rests on a complex web of historical accidents, cultural legacies, moral compromises, and lucky breaks. If these opportunities were more widely shared, many more people could achieve extraordinary success. The true lesson of Outliers is not to admire exceptional individuals, but to build societies that create opportunities for everyone.
If you liked this book summary, be sure to click the like button, comment the parts you loved, and share so others can see it. Subscribe to Better Relationships for more videos like these.